Hey, this is 100% Builders, and today we have with us Sandeep Jain, who is the CEO of MonetizeNow. MonetizeNow is an enterprise monetization platform that brings together the worlds of selling, quoting, and billing in one powerful platform to give enterprises the ability to dramatically scale up their revenue. Sandeep, can you tell us a little bit about who you are? What's your background?
Hi, glad to be here on the podcast. My name is Sandeep. I'm the co-founder and CEO of MonetizeNow that Irthafa talked about already. We are about 2.5 years old, 21 employees, growing steadily. As Irthafa talked about, we build that coding and selling platform for B2B SaaS enterprises. That's one of the areas, surprisingly, that's challenging still for the companies because these tools were not built for SaaS. And yeah, so we are having tremendous growth, tremendous fun building the company.
I want to dive a little bit into the genesis of Monetize Now, but before I do that, can you share a little bit about like what was your journey? Like how did you start to become like a founder and the CEO? What were you doing before that?
Sure. Before Monetize Now, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of different things, which is surprising to many people, but there was a reason behind why I did what I did. So I have bachelor's, master's in computer science back from 2000, a million years ago, I think. I started my career at a company called Juniper Networks in engineering. I was doing hardcore software programming there, managing a team, and whatever the good stuff. Then I transitioned into product management at a company called Palo Alto Networks that I'm sure listeners may be familiar with. And then I joined Cisco as a product management lead there as well. There I was managing a product line. It was a $400 million product line at that time. And we were doing a refresh. So all of the things of product management that you know of or you don't know about got tested in real life. And that's a fun conversation to be had at some time. But then I decided I wanted to start my company at some point in time. So I shifted gears and I went into consumer space and in a business development role, in a sales role, basically. So I would not be paid the customary bonus as an engineer and as a product manager. I would get just by showing up and doing some things. Before Monetize Now, I did a little bit of startup in a P2C space. It was in podcasting. One challenge that I ran into there was the market size. This is before Spotify jumped into it. Even right now, I think there are some challenges in that space. So I wanted to build a big company and I was not seeing that happening with my previous startup. So I pivoted, as the phrase goes or as the term goes. And I wanted to do something in B2B space, something that's near and dear to me, something I've experienced with. I wanted a big market. That's the problem that I had or my earlier startup. So you got to learn. So it has to be a big market, big problem. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I didn't have the idea. So I was looking at three spaces. I was looking at customer support, a lot of different angles there, and then a marketplace for trainers. And then the idea for Monetize Now came while I was working on these two ideas. So a lady at Zendesk, I was doing a customer research. My goal is to build $1 billion revenue company. Life is short, make something of it. That's what I want to do. And so she listened to my goal and my idea and support. And she said, Sandeep, if you want to build $1 billion company, I might have an idea or suggestion for you. Why don't you fix billing? What the hell is billing? It sounds like very simple. It's like a charge on a recurring basis. How complicated can it get? She's like, Sandeep, you probably don't understand the complexities. This was like 4 or 5 years ago now. And they were using Zora and Salesforce CPQ. These products were not built for SaaS and we have huge problems. If we can solve that problem, that'll be great. And I knew that it's in the path to revenue. If Zendesk is facing a problem, other B2B SaaS companies will also be facing this problem. The only little problem is I didn't know what the real problem here is in this space. Like, why was she saying the products don't work? So
Sandeep, for a
I'm like,
second, like there's so many like golden nuggets here. I want to go back to some of them. But before I do that, you said something about being in the path to revenue. Like, why is that part important?
actually, that's an important part. You can start a company, either you can help save some cost to the company or you can help make them more money. You can bucket the companies in these two broad spaces, right? And then there are some system of records that you got to buy because you have to buy them. If you help companies make money, even in the downturn, you will be in a good space because companies do want to make more money. Same argument could be made on the cost cutting side as well, but changing tools requires a lot of work. So companies always think twice before they have to go the cost cutting way. Yeah.
Oh, that's an amazing piece of advice for our listeners who are listening to Sandeep. So basically, what you're saying is both works, like cutting costs and helping people make money. But if you are in charge of picking a software where you're already using something existing and you basically have to remove something, the decision to like make more money as a company is a lot much easier decision as opposed to cutting costs for something that you've already been using and for a while.
Yep, you're right. And you're a founder and CEO, so you can possibly relate to some of these aspects. If somebody were to come to you and say, if I can make you $1, or I can save you one, which one gets you here? So
Yeah, I think Fred Wilson said something like it's a lot easier to make money when you make other people money. Something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing here. So before we get into the part about like exactly what happened, because you and I, we chatted about this and there's a very fascinating process that you followed to figure out like what to build next. But before I do that, you said something earlier where you went through, you were an engineer before, then you were in product management, then you ran like an entire business unit in Cisco. And then when you were at this smaller startup, you were basically leading their business development side, basically looking after sales. Why is that part? This is fascinating as a founder to hear that because I always thought like when I was at Cloudflare, I was doing product stuff. So I had exposure across to these like multiple units, but one of the things that I wish I could do if I could go back is also spend some time in a BDR role or just in sales. Like, why is that? How did you come to that? Like, how did that happen?
you're saying why I decided to do that, or
Yeah, like why and how was that like a very conscious decision because you wanted to start a company? And how did
yeah,
that sort of pan out?
yeah. And so just a little correction. I was not running a single business unit at Cisco. I was part of a business unit, but I was running a business within that business unit.
Got it.
Um, but the reason I shifted to sales was when I was at Cisco. So I'm really good in engineering and product. And what I realized is when we were doing sales, Cisco was doing enterprise sales. So they used to carry me along in their customer meetings. Sandeep, here's a competitive thing. Can you talk through this? And I still remember there was one incident where we almost lost the business to a competitor. And the sales guy said, Sandeep, can you just do a favor? Can you just fly down to Houston and just have a last chat with them? And it was the buyer and the user in the same room. And I still remember that room because it was one of the pivotal moments, at least for me. And so they had made the decision to go with a competitor. So the room was completely agreed on that. And I came along and I started asking them questions like, why? What are your objections? And I started whiteboarding. It was not like a big conference room. And what happened over the next 45 minutes is they realized that we had same things to offer as what the competitor had, but we just hadn't talked to them in a way that helps them explain that. After the 45-minute meeting, the deal came back to us. We won that deal. The salesperson was super, super happy. And it kind of spread like wildfire within the sales team. And they took me along in every conversation. Now, what I realized
That's
is
incredible.
you got to sell. The whole purpose of the company exists is, of course, to build a product, but you have to sell. If you can't sell, you might have built the best product and the business falls down, which I think is typical story of the Bay Area startups. You got to sell. And as engineers, and even as product, maybe not for product managers, but you have a shy personality because you understand logic, you want to build code, and you want to get things done. When you start talking to people, it's not about logic anymore. There is a method to selling, and it's super uncomfortable. And I'm an introvert. And I knew that if I started selling for my company and I don't have that muscle, I should build that muscle while I'm on somebody else's payroll, then on my phone. And I see that happening in the Bay Area companies all day long, is where the founder is deeply technical, which is how it is. But in the good times that work, but in the tough times, you got to be doing that conversation. So it was a very conscious decision. I'll tell you why it was a very conscious decision, because my salary was cut in half when I joined as a BD person from a product manager at Cisco. And I had to talk to my wife, and it's a big financial decision. But the whole idea was that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Apparently, it was a longer tunnel than me and my wife expected. But I would highly advise every aspiring founder to sell something at some time, not to your friends, not to your family, but to strangers.
Oh man, that is an incredible story. Like how thoughtful and conscious you were about taking on this new role to really build that muscle because you knew you had to do the selling when you were a founder. You already had that product and engineering background. One of the interesting things that you mentioned was like going back, going to Houston and talking to this customer who will probably lose, but being able to bring them back and like close, that must have been an incredible high. So it feels like you're naturally good at something, good at sales. What advice do you have for people who are introverts or are very technical, but have to build that muscle other than, of course, going through that period on someone else's dime? Are there any books or like videos that you would recommend to get up to speed with selling to B2B customers?
I frankly didn't read any books on this, but I'm pretty sure there are good books out there. One advice that I can give is, which has worked very well for me in all my deals, is empathy. And empathy means understanding what the other person is saying and not always selling what you have in mind. And one way to practice empathy is when somebody tells you something, repeat it, summarize it, say, okay, this is, I think, what you're trying to say. And some people might say, sounds obvious, like, how does it change anything? But when somebody summarizes your point, A, you're telling you were listening, and B, you got the points, the key points from that conversation. And the third thing is it helps you while you're stating this thing, it helps you formulate an answer because immediately that answer will not come to your mind. And that has helped in all my conversations. I don't know if it helps your listeners or not, but that's
You
something
know,
that
it does because like empathy, it feels like one of those words that just gets thrown around a lot. But the fact that like how you break it down about this is exactly what I'm doing right now, which is repeating back to you what I heard from you, which is, hey, do exactly that. I think I'm gonna get stuck in a recursion over here, so I'm gonna move on from this one. You were talking about how you speak to this lady who's working at Zendesk and exploring support, and she basically tells you, hey, there's this whole another problem related to billing that's $1 billion business. And that sort of starts your journey in chasing this idea. And I remember reading a blog post that you shared where we're going to share it in the show notes as well, how you went about figuring that out. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
sure you're seeing the process of customer discovery.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible story that you have.
Okay. So I first learned about the term customer discovery when I paid for my MBA school. And there's a professor called Steve Black, and he talks about customer discovery. And he used to say one thing at the top of his voice: get out of the building. What he was trying to say is a lot of people just stay inside the building, don't talk to others. They think they know the problem really well, and they build something that people may not need. And so I took that learning to heart. And the problem in this monetization space was my background was in network security, network switching, routing, and mobile advertising. It has nothing to do with CPQ world or billing and whatnot. So I went on LinkedIn and I was very courteous to people. And I used to reach out to the operators in this world, like the salespeople, the finance people, the sales ops, finance ops. And you write a message to the first person, they respond back. It was a 25-minute meeting. I didn't need to have 30 minutes meeting over the phone. So it shows some respect that you're not going end to end, little things like that. And then it was very quickly, look, I'm an entrepreneur. Here's what I'm trying to do. And you ask the 5 questions and you have 25 minutes with this person and they're gone and they're strangers to you, right? So you do that call, but what will happen is in the first call is going to be super uncomfortable. That person is a stranger, you're a stranger, and you're asking questions. You may not even know what questions to ask. But the thing is, after the fifth or sixth call, you will be an expert. You might think, how is that happen? But this will happen. We are humans. We'll adapt. We have a chat GPT-4 in our head that will help us see that. Also, another nugget was towards the end of the call, I used to ask them, and this was the virality part. is, can you name me two persons that you respect in this field that you think I should reach out to? And you're not, it's okay if you don't introduce me to them, and you can just tell me who these are. So with every call, I was getting two more leads. So that's an important fact, right? The second one is I was doing a LinkedIn Connect request instead of LinkedIn messages or whatever that called, the paid mail email thing that
In mail.
in mail. The problem with InMail is nobody reads that. I think it's a spam bucketed as InMail or marketed as InMail. And also the biggest drawback is you do not connect to that person. And remember, I didn't come from this ecosystem. So whenever I used to connect, they accept my request, their entire network is available to me in my search. So my network was getting built, and the people who were coming in my LinkedIn search was exponentially increasing with every meeting that I was having. I think there are some other points that I mentioned about changing your connect request based on who the listener is or who your guest is. Like if it is a CRO, tell that you're building $1 billion business.
So can you tell me, like, there are a lot of interesting things there, but I remember, like, even in the blog and when we were chatting casually, you mentioned that don't do Zoom, do like a phone call. Like, why is that important?
In the phone call, because you're not seeing each other, I think your mental faculties are more aligned to the conversation and the other person is more relaxed because they're not a stranger to you. I mean, they're a stranger to you. So you're not spending your mind cycles in looking at each other. And I think that's a distraction in my mind. Also, it was easier to send a phone number on the LinkedIn request. And if they cannot attend, they'll text you, they'll call you. I don't know. I'm going to split between the two, but I found phone numbers to be easier.
But that's so powerful because you're like, you don't have to focus on this video aspect, but also if for some reason they can't make it, there's like a direct channel of communication. You don't have to, just because someone didn't show up in Zoom, you don't have to go to email or none of that. There's only one tool that you're using. Other than that, like another thing that I learned from you, because we chatted about this before, where avoid InMail. Because when people see InMail, when you're trying to do really like customer discovery, because you're not trying to sell to people, you're actually trying to research, you're trying to get to know others and build your network. It's so important to just connect and reach out to them in the normal way, not in the InMail slash salesy way, which
Yeah.
I thought was incredibly valuable when we started
And one
chatting.
thing I'll add to this enterprise is that this research I did 4 years ago, I talked to more than 200 people. Some of them have become my customers. Some of them have become my employees. Some of them are analysts. You're actually building your company when you do the customer discovery. I think this is something I didn't learn at school, but through the process, I learned that you're building this whole ecosystem around you, which is hugely powerful. And you should not underestimate that part as well.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, did some of those people become your customers? But it sounds, you just answered that. It sounds like yes. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. Once you have the idea, you figure out what to build. What did the early iteration of Monetize Now look like? Like, what did that, like, how was the team? How many people were there? How did those early days look like for you?
Early days were interesting. Think of this shift if people are old enough to figure out the transition from a BlackBerry to an iPhone. We were trying to do something similar because we were trying to say that, look, there is three separate industries: CPQ, billing, and usage. And three separate industries, three separate vendors. And we were the first ones to say, look, this architecture does not make sense. And this is not an engineering thing that we try to combine. Engineers always get an idea of let's build something new and better and whatever. But from a business process perspective, separating these tools for SaaS is a non-starter. That was the learning of my research. And when we went to raise money, investors are like, are you kidding me? This idea is great, but what does your MVP look like here? It takes 3 years to build like a CPQ and 3 years for a billing, 3 years probably for the usage. And you jokers come here and say you can do this thing together faster. Oh, what's the challenge? So our early days were proving that our hypothesis is right, is building that infrastructure of these three products together. And if you do that right, it helps you go faster. So early days were a lot of fun proving that. We landed our first design partner within 2 months of founding the company. And
Incredible.
This customer was not a friend of ours. He was referred to us through a VC firm that we had talked to at some time. And they said, you guys seem to be solving that problem. Why don't you talk to these people? And as any founders would say, all founders should say that I'll give you a demo in a month, by the way. And I did say that, but of course, we didn't have many lines of code written at that time. And we just let bygones be bygones. But this customer came back to us, our prospect, saying, Sandeep, where's the demo that you promised to me? And it was like, aha moment, like never happens in selling when a prospect, a core prospect comes to you. We gave them the demo and they
So
became,
let's pause for a second. Like this person reached out back to you, like, hey, when are you going to give the demo? Because the pain that they were feeling was so acute, so critical that they came back to you, even though you were selling a product to them.
that was the most fascinating thing that happened to us here at the firm is, and once again, these are people that I didn't know of them before. They're not like friends that I had done business with. And so it told me that the problem is really acute. And we worked like day and night, the entire company for 1 week, and then demo down. But once they looked at them, of course, we didn't have all the bells and whistles, but they looked at our approach. They, not from a theoretical perspective, but look, the product is bad. It has rough edges, of course, as any product would at that stage. And I was very upfront with them. This is another empathy part of the firm. I told this person, look, I'm a startup, 4-month old startup. It'll take me time to build what you need. Are you willing to wait for the time? The reason I want to stress this, emphasize, it's a very uncomfortable question for a founder to say. Much like it's how much are you going to pay for this, right? Founders run away
Right.
from these uncomfortable questions. But if you ask it nicely, and I did ask about pricing as well, and there was an uncomfortable conversation there as well, because what I was asking was never done in the industry before. But he was like, Sandeep, why are you saying this way? Because we don't pay our software this way. I was like, here is why what I'm thinking. And you need to have that back and forth as the firm. If all
Right.
your sales conversations are, here's a product, buy it, then you have made it. But people will always have objections. If you have not done objection handling as a founder, you have not built that sales muscle, I would say.
Sandeep, curious as a founder who like leads sales and also like other people who are listening to this podcast, like we've all been in those situations where, like you said, when you're a startup, when you're building your MVP, it's not going to have all the bells and whistles. It's not going to be that perfect product where you can just say, oh, no objections, let's just buy it. What advice do you have for people where you come in with the product, solves a problem for the customer, but it doesn't have a lot of the things that they probably will need to close, or at least it seems like that in that moment? What advice do you have for people of what to do next? Like how to continue that conversation?
The biggest advice is there'll always be asymmetry between what your customer wants and what you think you can provide them. You have to always listen. A company or a person comes to a startup because they want to solve a problem, not a multitude of problems. They have one big resonating problem that they want to get solved. It's your job as a founder sometime to figure out what that problem is, because they might be saying they have a problem A, but you tell them you're having problem A because you have this problem B. And that's the root
Mhm,
cause.
mhm.
So focusing on that problem definition first in that conversation and saying, we're going to just solve for that. Nobody cares about your roadmap 15 months down the line. As a founder, you want to talk about this, it's okay. It's good, right? But just solve that one problem beautifully than anybody else that can do. And I think that's how you get your business with them. And of course, you have to show the vision, because nobody wants to buy a point solution as well. But they want to buy a point solution in that time. So you have to solve that problem, but give them the vision so that, oh, these people know what they're talking about as well. They will be my long-term partners. They're not just a professional services company that will just solve that single problem of theirs.
That's super helpful. So there's this initial part of, hey, they're buying this point solution, but you mentioned something about showing them the vision. So is that happening in the form, of course, like conversations, but also are you sharing with the roadmap? What is the artifact that the customer gets to see?
What the customer gets to see is here you actually act. I think that's a great question, Artafa. So the first part of sales is you are solving their problem. right? So you have to solve that problem. The second part is you have to act like a McKinsey consultant, right? Because McKinsey doesn't say that here is your problem. They give you, I understand this problem better than you do. And this is how, in the bigger world, this problem solution would look like. So you give them an architecture diagram, you give them best practices. Then there's a relationship of trust now. That not only they can solve my problem right now, but they can be my partners as I think about doing different in this particular space, whatever it might be. So you have to get that command of knowledge. You have to earn that respect that these people know what they're talking about and they have a vision of a product. It may take you 10 years. That's okay. But the fact that you can actually are thinking on those lines is hugely valuable to a buyer at that time.
That is incredible advice. This idea of, I love how you coined the term, like being the McKinsey consultant, because you are, you have to learn and build trust with the customer that, hey, like I know about this space. I can help you solve this problem. I have ideas that will move this thing forward. And that's how you build trust and you be partner with the customer and go on this journey with them, not just solve the problem today, but also how you're going to solve things in the future together in a much better way.
Yeah. There's also one thing that I was recalling is problem discovery. So sometimes people have problems, but they don't talk about it. And so if you are the one say, do you have problems in this area? And somebody jumps up and says, oh my God, this is a problem that has been. And once people have that click in their head, then that trust becomes more meaningful because now you're like Dr. Phil to them. Like you're getting things out of them that they didn't know existed. And again, it goes back to the power of empathy and being that bringing things out of them. Anyhow.
No, that's super helpful. So, then can you talk a little bit about how do you guys go from knowing a feature that you guys are going to build to actually shipping that to the customer? Like, I know you're running the company right now and there's people running the engineering team, but from you as the founder, what does that look like? What are the different phases of shipping a product?
Yep. Well, that's a very important question because I still see companies not doing it well. And I firmly believe in a writing culture. So if you have a product requirement and you might think it might be a simple, and I actually learned it in my career. There was this company I was working at, and as a product manager, I wrote the requirements. And my manager said, why don't you design the UI for this? Just block, whatever. And at that time, I was very naive and stupid. And I said, that's the job of a UI person, right? And why should I do that? Not because I'm lazy, but I thought it was illogical. That was the thing in my mind. And he said, no, Sandeep, you got to do this. You got to do this. I'm like, okay, you're my boss. I'll do it. And you know what? When I drew this thing out, I questioned my requirement left and right. I like, these requirements don't make sense. I have no idea what I was talking about because when you're writing, putting things together, actually in the UI diagram, I realized that workflow is illogical that I had written out there. And so is moving forward to monetize now, what we do when we start working on a feature is we write requirements. We spend an inordinate amount of time on requirements and we make sure that we have covered everything there. We have some idea about UI considerations as part of our requirements, open questions. And what happens, and we put this on our internal page, which is Confluence, and then people comment on this, right? So what we're doing is we are actually designing the feature. We are writing the code of the feature before doing any of those things at the requirement stage. So if you have 100% of your cycle for product development, I would say 60 to 70% has to be in product definition. And sometimes product managers hesitate to write things. They'll just say, yeah, this is a use case one, use case two, go figure it out. Those companies and products don't eventually do well, is my big hypothesis. But yeah, so we spend a lot of time on requirements, then it goes to the design, and we have vetted everything at that time. So that conversation becomes short. Then we create a backend and the front end tickets. We think about APIs and we use Slack for internal communication. Yeah. I don't know if there's anything else you want to know.
Yeah. And it reminds me of that saying, writing is thinking, because you're spending a lot of time specking out what the requirements will look like, the mock-ups and everything in a very early stage. And also you're doing another thing where you're bringing your team in to have those early discussions, like across the board before they start writing code. So all the opinions are basically put out there, the debates happen. And by the time this doc is like finalized, people already know, like you said, like what to build and how to build it. And it just probably saves so much more time for you guys.
Yeah. In fact, we were doing another bad thing, which we stopped doing is we came into a meeting, somebody has written a doc, and people started talking about this. We said, no, time out. We're going to use first 5-10 minutes to just read the document. Everybody's quiet on the call. You just spend time reading the document, write your comments, and then we'll start talking. There is this innate human tendency to talk, which is probably what I'm doing right now. But the listening part is so important, and doing some work offline that helped us tremendously.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. And how do you guys, let's say the planning happens, the code happens. How do you guys measure and maintain quality when you guys are shipping features?
How do we maintain quality? So we have an elaborate testing process. We are a billing software company. So if something goes wrong, it really goes wrong. So whatever QA work or infrastructure, we have to think thrice in terms of how we do this. So we have dev, staging, prod as three separate things. We have different test infrastructure automated as well, and we have non-automated way to test things. Yeah. So the big thing is we do a test driven development as well in some cases where before writing a single line of code, we are saying, let's write all the test cases based on the spec. And you don't even know what the code is. So that has helped us actually on the billing side, of the equation a lot. I
And
don't know if there's any
Sandeep,
other aspects you want to go on.
yeah, I'm curious because like that customer you mentioned earlier, you are Monetize Now is one of our design partners since very early days of Jam. Like how has that testing process changed before and like after using Jam?
Jam has been a savior for us. I'm not saying this because you're interviewing me here, but what Jam allowed is to put everybody in the company to, from the time that they see an issue and report that, you cut that down dramatically. Now, any of my sales rep, if they're giving a demo and they find something odd, they'll put a jam, they'll file a Jira ticket right from there. And so that has enabled us to report more issues that we probably may not have because people forget, oh, somebody else is going to figure it out. And that has helped in two ways. One, we report more bugs internally. Second, we reduce the time of what were you doing when you reported this bug? It's in the video, right? It's in the calls. Like you can see everything. So it's you go to an ER and the doctor has everything in the report written out. So he or she doesn't need to talk to the emergency medical personnel because the information is documented. And time is money for sure. And it's been a huge help for us. Yeah.
That is awesome to hear. Like Sandeep, we are all builders, right? We're building our companies, we're building our products. And you and I, like even before this podcast, we would catch up sometimes and we'd trade tools. Like we'd talk about what tools are making us productive and can we share with each other. And I'll be honest with you and also the audience, I have received more from you than I've given you. Would you be like able to share what are some like recent tools that you absolutely love using that has made you more productive or has made the company more productive? Anything that jumps into your mind?
One of it is Slack. People know about it, but the reason I love this is I put prospects and customers there. So it has become my number one thing to talk to all of my customers and prospects. Everybody gets there. We don't use a ticketing system internally at all right now because all the conversations happen there. So I love the part of Slack because it
And by
enables to
ticketing system, you mean like a sales ticketing system, right? Like not no
send.
HubSpot, no Salesforce, no Zendesk, that kind of stuff that's going on.
So we do have a HubSpot internally now for our CRM, but just from an issue tracking purposes, external issue tracking purposes, it's our Slack, and I love it. It just builds that relationship of trust because bigger companies don't have Slack. Like Cisco didn't have Slack. Like big companies cannot do. Like you have to talk to a person or chat, right? They're not on your direct communication. It probably will change as we scale. I would choose not to because I think this is really important. So one is Slack. Second tool that I really like is Dripify. This is for the sales purposes. It helps you automate some LinkedIn messaging, and it has helped us tremendously as well. There was a tool I was made aware of called Lemlist, which is email warming. There are these things that founders don't know anything about. Like once you start your company, you buy a domain and you're very happy. And I got that domain. You should be. But you should always buy a second domain at that time because you'll be using that domain for email outreach. None of the founders I speak with, unless they worked in sales before, they would know that. And for that, you need email warning. Otherwise, your email is going to turn up in spam or the Google jail. So that's another tool that I like. I
So
don't know
are
if
you
there's any.
saying you have monetizenow.com and but also a separate sales domain where you reach out to people for like email, cold
Oh,
outreach
that's
and
like
things like that?
it's a business hygiene now. It's not even a best practices anymore. This is like you brush your teeth in the morning, you got to do this, right? And the reason if you don't do that, your main domain, if you start doing email outreach from your main domain, your email is going to get blocked. You don't want that. You always have a separate email domain like that. That's just basic common sense right now.
And you were talking about how you use Slack to manage all of these conversations and customers. We at Jam, what we do with people is like with our design partners and customers, we would have Slack Connect private channels where we would like, they would be, would update them about features and bugs. And also they would feel the same whenever they feel like there's a bug report or they have a feature request, they would reach back out to us using the same channel. But what does that look like for prospects? Like, how do you convince people to join your Slack when they're just a prospect?
So a prospect would never jump on like, sit on being on a date. Nobody gives you their phone number unless they think that there is a future there. So you have to prove that value first. And then when people want to experiment with the product and they have questions, you say that we have an option of a Slack channel. And nobody wants an extra Slack channel, by the way, on their Slack feed. But if they see you as a partner, somebody who can help them with their questions as they're thinking about other products. Look, if you're thinking about other products and if you have a question, you can Slack us. And people know that Slack is much faster than email. Emails get lost or whatever. And so you got to earn that trust. But once you're on Slack, it just moves the relationship to a new level.
That's super helpful. We keep going back to this one point about like having empathy and like building trust before going to the next step. And I think like pure people who are listening to this, that's pretty much a required and a prerequisite when you are going through a sales motion with your prospects and your customers. Yeah. Okay. Next one. Who are your champion early customers and has this remained consistent?
Yeah, we had multiple customers that came along as it happens with any other company. Two of our earliest, biggest customers were Middesk and Captivate IQ. And we have expanded our relationship with them in terms of going from one use case to another. And it has been really wonderful working with them. We work with them as partners and not as customer vendor, especially because of the technology stack that we are responsible for, revenue operations. It's like the heart of the company. If that fails, it creates a huge impact. So we are very fortunate enough to have customers in that relationship. And so we have young customers and like smaller companies and bigger companies alike. And fortunately, that has remained the same.
And we're full disclosure, we're a happy customer of Monetize Now as well. So it's not just for big companies, startups
Yeah,
can use them too.
thank
Um,
you.
and what is a feature that your company has launched recently that you're really excited about?
Quite a few things we are doing. But one thing that was really interesting is we will send out an email. So I'm very big on not just the product, but give me the learnings. Give me a gist of what's happening inside the product. And I don't think many companies do that today. So what we're going to do is, this features in the development that every week we're going to give a snapshot of how the tool helped your company. So how many quotes were sent, how much pipeline we created in a week, and which rep did what, some sort of a snapshot. And what it does is it gives us a silent engagement to your buyer. Oh my God, MonetizeNow is doing that. I thought it was not doing that. Oh, this is the information. So it's not only about the metrics, but the ROI as well. by shortening every tool helps you get some ROI. So if you can have that ROI in terms of dollars mentioned in your email, it just makes it more real. We use a lot of tools internally. There's only one tool in my stack that does that. And my association with that tool, just to tell you, increases because weekly I get that report. And so if you have a product that's actually not working out well, it won't be good for you because your customer is going to say, I'm not realizing as much value from this product as I think I would. And I'm super excited about that feature getting rolled out.
Look, congratulations on that. You probably have to think about this. You're totally right how receiving these emails, especially when there's an like ROI involved and you can show and quantify exactly how you're either saving people money or how you're making people money. There's also this other part of, hey, like, why is this company spamming the hell out of my inbox? Like, why are they sending me so many emails? How do you think about balancing those things out?
So two things. I'll give you an example. I'm currently using a tool that I'm not going to use once the contract gets over. And because the data from that tool is not helping us. Now, the thing is, if they I'll answer your question in a second, but the reason why sending those emails is important is you as a founder, or if you have a customer success team, data is data, right? So when you look at the data, it's, oh my God, they're doing nothing. They're like in case of Jam, let's say they're not reporting bugs for last 2 months. What's happening here? You probably will know this much faster because you're managing those metrics internally, but it'll give you an early indication of churn and the ability to change things. As you grow a number of customers, you'll be surprised how many times you drop that ball because you're not operationalizing this thing. In terms of a spam, if people are not liking this, they can unsubscribe it. It's just you send it only to the admin. You're not sending it to the entire company, right? So you're very thoughtful about who you're sending it to and change the frequency of weekly to bi-weekly, but you must send this. I'm a big believer in that. If people are not opening it, if they're not engaging with it, there are other problems that it can uncover.
That's probably like a good sign of, hey, someone's about to churn and you have to spend some time or effort into actually fixing a different kind of problem. Email is not the problem.
Yeah.
So we're at the last part of the interview. Any books, podcasts that people you want to shout out or that influenced you or inspired you?
There's a lot of people that inspire me. So I don't think I can name all of them. And they're people in our regular lives. They don't need to be like Jack Welch kind of people. You know what I'm saying? But one book that has really changed my way of thinking, and I like reading books that are more tactical, which give advice that you can act upon, is a book called The Great CEO Within. I don't remember the name of the authors. It's a very small book or a short book that
Do you mean this book, Sandeep?
you got it, man. Tell me about that or
No, but like this book, I bought this book when I was a product manager and it basically helped me stay more organized, go through things fast and operationalize like day-to-day stuff. Like I don't think, at least for me, it wasn't just about for CEOs, it's like anyone who's doing knowledge work or driving projects, working with multiple organizations, it's super valuable.
Yeah, I think it's a must read for especially technical founders, CEOs, because it gives a lot of advice that selling advice as well, or operational advice that you can enact in your company from day one. I really love this book.
Thank you for sharing that. Sandeep, it was great having you on the podcast, man. We learned so much and I can't wait for other people to listen to this and reach out back to you with questions. Where can people find you on the internet?
If they're smart enough, they can figure out my email as my first name and at monetizenow.io. So happy to help if there's anything. But yeah, you can reach out by emailing me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Itifa, for having me.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this episode of 100% Builders, a podcast by Jam.dev. We believe that people who love to build software and companies do better when we learn from each other. If you're getting value from it, we would really appreciate it if you could leave a rating in the podcast section. It would mean a lot to us. Thank you and see you for the next episode.